Good morning. It's Saturday, August the 9th. I'm Ali Velshi, and I cannot overstate this, and I will keep saying it for as long as it needs to be said. We're in the midst of one of the most dangerous moments in modern American history. It will be studied. It will be written about. It will long after we are all gone. And when future generations look back, they won't just wonder what we thought. They will judge us for how we responded, just as we judge those who came before us. This past week, the Trump White House has been in overdrive, not to govern, not to serve the American people, but to bury the Epstein scandal that threatens to swallow the Trump presidency whole. And in Donald Trump's desperation, he's escalating his campaign of retribution. Here's this week's hit list from the White House of distractions. He directed the military to go after foreign drug cartels, a threat that by every serious national security assessment ranks near the bottom of the list. The sudden ousting of the supremely unqualified head of the IRS, who incidentally was the fifth head of the IRS since the beginning of Donald Trump's second term 6 months ago. Deploying the FBI to locate Texas lawmakers who stand in the way of the Republican plan to control future elections, which is puzzling because no federal law has been broken. Opening an investigation into one of his rivals in the Senate, issuing a federal subpoena against New York's Attorney General for the crime of doing her job and investigating Donald Trump's conduct. This isn't governing. This is the federal government hijacking and repurposed into two things: a damage control machine protecting Donald Trump from the Epstein fallout, and a tool of retribution punishing his perceived enemies. Let's talk about perhaps the most brazen escalation yet of Trump's revenge spree. On Friday, the Justice Department opened several investigations into New York Attorney General Letitia James, the same Letitia James who nailed Trump with more than $500 million in civil penalties over the Trump Organization's fraudulent business practices. There's now a grand jury looking into whether she somehow violated his civil rights or mishandled a Trump civil fraud case and a separate case involving the NRA. Separately, a so-called special attorney has been assigned to investigate mortgage fraud allegations against A.G. James and the Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, another Trump rival. James fired back shortly after the news, calling it a blatant political retribution. Her office issued a statement saying, quote, "Any weaponization of the justice system should disturb every American. We stand strongly behind our successful litigation against the Trump Organization and the National Rifle Association, and we will continue to stand up for New Yorkers' rights," end quote. Her attorney went further, labeling the probe a dangerous escalation and, quote, "the most blatant and desperate example of this administration carrying out the president's political retribution campaign," end quote. Now, this all comes on the heels of the FBI earlier this week apparently agreeing to help locate Democratic lawmakers from Texas who've left the state in order to block the GOP's plan to aggressively redraw Texas's congressional map. It's a gerrymander so extreme that it could lock in a Republican House majority after the 2026 midterms. Trump and his allies are deploying the FBI, not to catch criminals, but to hunt down elected lawmakers for refusing to help Republicans rig the state's electoral map. These lawmakers, let's just be entirely clear here, have committed no federal crime. Their offense is standing up for their constituents' political voice. I also didn't know that you could just get the FBI to do whatever, regardless of whether or not any federal crime has been committed. We have sitting elected officials who are literally fighting autocracy in exile in America. This is not an ordinary day. It marks a dangerous turning point in our nation's modern history. And now Trump is urging Republicans in other states to follow suit and redraw their own electoral maps. By targeting the elected representatives of the American people, those Texas legislators, and an elected attorney general, an elected senator, Donald Trump is targeting American people. The message is clear. You have no say in how your government is run. This is what experts like Jason Stanley call competitive authoritarianism, in which our democratic and electoral processes are reduced to being nothing more than ceremonial relics. The U.S. Justice Department is no longer the U.S. Justice Department. It's Trump's revenge machine, weaponized to settle scores, crush rivals, and protect his own skin. Earlier this year, the administration formed the Weaponization Working Group, intended, they said, to root out, quote, abuses of the criminal justice process. But effectively, it's meant to scrutinize prosecutors who launched past investigations into Donald Trump or his allies. We're also seeing agency purges. All of the mechanics of what Miles Taylor, the former DHS chief of staff turned whistleblower, has been warning about, the revenge presidency. Taylor himself has been a target. Trump recently accused him of treason and ordered the DOJ to investigate him for his now famous, then anonymous New York Times op-ed titled, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." Taylor warned this week that the dismantling of Democratic guardrails is happening in every corner of the federal government and beyond. He says, quote, "What's unfolded in just 6 months is even more destructive than most envisioned. And it's been wrapped in Orwellian rhetoric unfamiliar to our democracy," end quote. He adds, "Our system of government can withstand a lot. But as the founders warned, it was never designed to withstand a demagogue who commands the levers of party and the loyalty of his party, the levers of power and the loyalty of his party." Which brings me back to my original point. We've entered a truly dangerous chapter in American history. Never before have we seen the executive branch so openly and so brazenly weaponize justice and law enforcement to target the president's political opponents. This isn't just a political spat. It's a direct assault on democracy, on federalism, on the fundamental principle that government exists to serve the people. Miles Taylor joins me now. He served in the first Trump administration as the chief of staff for the Department of Homeland Security. As I mentioned, he's now being targeted by Donald Trump for writing the then anonymous op-ed critical of the president. Taylor is the author of 2 books, including Blowback, a warning to save democracy from Trump's revenge. I'm also joined by our great friend of the show, Lisa Rubin, an MSNBC legal correspondent and former litigator. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us this morning. Miles, from what we're seeing in the last week, Donald Trump is targeting everybody, elected officials. He's weaponizing the DOJ. You're saying this is beyond the worst case scenarios that even you envisioned, and you've been a target of Donald Trump's for some time.
I think that's right, Ali. And, this is something that wasn't just foreseeable a few years ago. This was foreseeable a few hundred years ago. I mean, you had George Washington warn that the spirit of revenge, if it overtook our politics, could really corrode and destroy the republic, among other founders. And here we are, we're living it. And the reason I think people are surprised, even the people who had predicted the sky might start falling, myself included, are surprised by how quickly this has all transpired. I mean, I did a rough calculation of the things that I predicted in Blowback would happen as part of the president's revenge campaign. And about 70% of them have already come to fruition in the first half year or so of his presidency. That's a breakneck pace that we didn't anticipate. What worries me is that other 30%, the things he hasn't done yet. And he's starting well down that path of weaponizing things like the spy powers of the United States government and other tools he hasn't used yet to go after his enemies. And we've seen that in just the past 2 weeks with the way he's used Tulsi Gabbard, his director of national intelligence, to go after the Obama administration and Obama officials, the DOJ picking up on that alley and launching a, quote, strike force to go after those officials. And even if none of these people are prosecuted, Ali, I'm living it right now and can tell you the process is the punishment.
This is something I want to discuss with you at a little length, because that's the thing that people don't understand. Barack Obama, Letitia James, Adam Schiff, they all have a certain protection around them in that they were elected officials. There are certain fences around them. You weren't. You're a civil servant. They go after journalists. They go after civil servants. They go after people who, there are basic things that happen in your life when you get targeted by Donald Trump, let alone the Department of Justice or an investigation. You got to get lawyers. You got to get sometimes security. Somebody I know who's being sued by Donald Trump in a case that probably has no merit can't get a mortgage. They're basic things that happen to your life that are meant to dissuade you or others from doing the things that you have done.
Yeah, I mean, look, they know that by merely adding you to the blacklist, Ali, they can destroy your life without having to bring charges, without having to do any of that. I mean, in our case, without exaggeration, we have more than 8 separate legal teams And you would think, well, why on earth do you have 8 separate legal teams? Well, we've got the folks that are focused on our legal defense against the executive order, but everything that's happened since then, our business imploded in the wake of it. We've had to bring legal teams on for that. We've had to update our estate documents in case, God forbid, something happens to me and my wife and someone has to take care of our daughter. We've had to go fight stalkers in court around the country, people who've taken Donald Trump's words literally that we've committed treason and should be punished with death. And the list goes on. I mean, we have these teams and they, even one legal team to go against one of these things can bankrupt you and ruin your life. And so we've realized that the only way we are able to defend ourselves and other people who are in this position are able to defend ourselves is to crowdsource that defense. And we're very lucky. I mean, we had an organization to help us launch something called End Presidential Revenge. It's endpresidentialrevenge.org as a place where whistleblowers who are being targeted can essentially get the support they need from a legal defense standpoint. That's not how things should be in this country. You shouldn't be in a position of having to worry that because of your public service or because of your dissent, that the president of the United States is going to be able to destroy your life with the stroke of a pen. And this is not something that I enjoy speaking about, Allie, but it's really important to me and my wife that we get out there every single day to let people know what this is really looking like, because our country is transforming before our eyes. And your opening here is probably one of the most concise ways I've heard that laid out since this all began.
I believe, yes, the files should be released. I'm tired of the government saying that they want to release them. So please just do it.
That's just one of the many Jeffrey Epstein accusers demanding transparency and making sure that the voices of survivors don't go unheard. Now, a group of House Democrats is following their lead. This week, in a letter to House Oversight Committee Chairman Congressman James Comer, lawmakers called for a congressional hearing with the victims of Epstein, writing, "If we are to hold powerful people to account, our investigation must censor the voices they tried to silence." That request came after 2 anonymous survivors filed letters to the court in Epstein's federal criminal case in Manhattan condemning the DOJ's request to unseal grand jury testimony and its handling of the files. One of the survivors wrote, quote, "I am not some pawn in your political warfare. Why not be completely transparent? Show us all the files with only the necessary redactions. Be done with it and allow us to heal." And now DOJ is also asking for grand jury exhibits to be unsealed in Epstein's and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell's cases. Joining us now, Gretchen Carlson, journalist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices. Gretchen, thank you very much for coming back to the show and for being here on set. I want you to listen to another Epstein survivor. This is Jess Michaels and what she said to our colleague Ari Melber on Thursday. Listen to this.
I have not heard the words Epstein survivor out of the White House ever. This is a very personal, painful, both physically, emotionally, mentally, intellectually painful experience to go through, to see the level of injustice. I believe what we're seeing is a normalization of the decriminalization of sexual harm.
And Gretchen, what she just said there, I'd love your reaction to her saying that what we are seeing is a normalization of the decriminalization of sexual harm.
Well, let me paint a picture for you here. They have been forgotten from the beginning. Back in 2006, that whole case gave a sweetheart deal to Epstein, and he continued to violate women and girls after that. Then he died in prison, and so they were not allowed to seek justice by actually having him go on trial. There was a short reprieve when Maxwell was actually convicted, but now that's being politicized. Now we have Donald Trump calling it a hoax, and now we have the idea that none of these survivors have been contacted to actually release the grand jury testimony, which, by the way, is illegal if they are not contacted to do so. And then you have Trump saying that he didn't want to hurt people. So, but the implication was not that he was talking about survivors with releasing the information. It was that maybe he would be hurting some of his friends in high places. I say all that to say that it sounds negative. However, we are in this moment today because we believe these survivors.
Right.
In 2025, we live in a different cultural environment. We're not demanding that they come forward to tell their stories because we're questioning the validity of it. No, we believe them. The American public is demanding the accountability of the perpetrators. So we have both things working at the same time. We have the White House not paying attention to the survivors, and that's a negative. But we have the American public demanding information. 86% of the American public wants information. And that is a credit to the courage of these survivors for coming forward and telling their stories.
That's across the political
It
spectrum. Survivors are used to being forgotten. Right, and that as a part of our system. These survivors, as you said, almost everyone is calling for some kind of justice for them. Justice looks different for every survivor. So talk a little bit about, as you know, these women who were girls when they were hurt and raped. What justice looks like for them? What is it? What are the things that, for the ones that you've talked, because I'm sure you've been in touch with them, we've had at least one on our show. What do they tell you about what justice looks like for them?
Well, first of all, it's being believed, right? When I came forward 9 years ago at Fox News, I thought I was all by myself. And I wanted vindication that I was telling the truth. And then thousands of people started reaching out to me, and I realized, oh my gosh, we all want the same thing, right? You just want to be believed. We're now a lot more along in progress in doing so. But the other thing is that they want to be able to own their own voices. And this is what I fight against now, are things like NDAs, because a lot of these women signed NDAs as young girls before they were actually recruited to come and work, right? They had no idea they were signing away what was eventually going to happen to them. And this happens all the time to regular people in the workplace as well. And then it happens and they realize they don't own their own voice. And I would say that of the thousands of people I've talked to, they say, when can I tell my story? When can I own my own voice? And if they've signed something like that, I unfortunately have to say never. I mean, the unbelievable fact is that I don't own my own story.
Yeah.
And so I can't even tell you the details. Luckily, I can talk about this and help other people. But that's something that all survivors want, is to own their own story.
You know, multiple times President Trump has been asked the question, would you pardon Ghislaine Maxwell? Because she obviously wants a pardon. And he never categorically says no.
I know.
Right.
That this is, it's still hanging out there. So what
He
do
says,
you,
I can do it.
Right. I haven't thought about it, but I mean, I can do it. What do you make of the fact that President Trump still refuses to categorically rule out a pardon for a convicted sex trafficker, sex assaulter?
I think that that is the biggest slap in the face to the survivors of everything else that I listed. Because that is, to your point earlier, normalizing the fact that it doesn't matter what she did. The idea that that would even be on the table for consideration, that is going to cross all party lines. There will be an insurrection if that happens. It won't just be Democrats. It'll be MAGA. It'll be independents. It will be everybody, because we are at a place in the society right now where we know that child sex trafficking is a crime and that you should not be granted clemency or any release for doing that to young women.
He did release her from, I should say Ghislaine Maxwell was released from this maximum security prison to a Club Fed.
And that is very worrisome to me, because while Congress is on recess and they can't call these hearings and have these people come testify, and by the way, they should call the survivors to come and testify for those as well. But I'm worried that another shoe may drop here, where maybe from a political point of view, they will grant her a pardon before any of the rest of that can happen. But I think the American public would rise up against that, because we are at a different place in 2025 than we were even just 9-10 years ago.
Lawyers for the Epstein survivors wrote a letter to the judge overseeing the possible unsealing of the jury material in Maxwell's case on this possible pardon. I'm going to read from this a little bit. Several victims have already died by suicide, drug overdose, or under tragic circumstances tied directly to the trauma caused by Epstein and Maxwell. The psychological toll of this abuse is ongoing. A pardon issued in silence or secrecy would reignite deep trauma, destabilize the already fragile healing process of many survivors and could result in further irreparable harm, including loss of life. It would suggest to victims everywhere that powerful predators are once again above the law. That last line there, it would suggest to victims everywhere that powerful predators are once again above the law. Do you see it that way?
Of course. Yeah. And I would hope that there would be at least one advisor to President Trump that would be telling him what a grave error this would be. But see, we don't know what's in all this information. So we don't know what they may be protecting, right? And if that is more paramount to actually listening to the survivors and honoring them, that's the problem, which is why the Trump administration, the DOJ, could release everything today, this morning, while you're on the air live. They could get this done right now, and they would satisfy their base, and they would satisfy the inquiry from millions of Americans who now want more information.
Gretchen Carlson, journalist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices. Thank you so much for being on set with us this morning.
Joining me now, Dave Ehrenberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Megan Hayes, former director of message planning in the Biden White House, and Michelle Price, Associated Press White House reporter. Welcome to you all. Dave, reaching out to you first here, because DOJ requesting the unsealing of Epstein grand jury transcripts. I mean, that is the most concrete step that the Trump administration has taken so far to try to advance a level of transparency. But will it answer questions that are still lingering about this case?
No, Alex, it's an attempt to placate the base. But even if the transcripts are released, and I doubt they will, because after all, Ghislaine Maxwell has an appeal pending before the Supreme Court, and she is urging the courts to reject the release of these documents because it could prejudice her own future cases. So I don't think they will be released. But even if they are released, the Trump administration, in their own request, has said that they will redact the names of any unindicted third-party co-conspirators. That material is what the public is demanding. That's what the base wants. They want to know the names of the unindicted co-conspirators. So even if these transcripts are released, and I doubt they will be, they're not going to give the people what they want. This matter is not going away anytime soon unless and until the Epstein files are released, and that's not happening.
Yeah. Megan, given how things work in the White House, is it plausible that the president had no advance knowledge of the Maxwell move?
In a normal White House, in the Biden White House, the Obama White House, the Bush White House, yes, that would have been absolutely normal. The DOJ is a separate arm of the administration of the executive branch in the White House. But this administration, this is 100% normal. These people do not make a move without Donald Trump say so. Todd Blanche is Donald Trump's personal attorney who just happens to be cosplaying as the deputy attorney general at the Department of Justice. So this is not something that Donald Trump would have no knowledge of. He directed this.
So, Michelle, here's how President Trump responded Wednesday after Vice President Vance denied that he and others were planning an Epstein strategy session. Listen to this.
The whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats because we've had the most successful 6 months in the history of our country. And that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
Okay, so NBC News is reporting that the meeting did, in fact, take place at the White House Wednesday night, and Epstein was among the topics discussed. What more are you learning about that meeting?
I mean, Alex, it's hard to believe that this isn't a thing that is discussed more often than just one meeting. This has been an ongoing internal communications issue for this White House. And the message has been convoluted, and it has been a self-inflicted wound for weeks or months now. You saw the way the vice president responded this week. He was very careful in his language, saying there was no meeting scheduled specifically to talk about Epstein. There was a lot of wiggle room in that response. But we're expecting this to be an ongoing discussion here at the White House because it's still something that's being debated internally about whether to release the transcripts and the audio, potentially, of that interview that Todd Blanche did with Ghislaine Maxwell just a few weeks ago.
So, Megan, what would your advice have been if you were a part of that Epstein strategy meeting? I mean, how can Trump dig himself out of this mess? And by the way, he thinks of himself as a marketing expert. Would he even be open to advice?
Well, it's hard to dig yourself out of something when you're so blatantly involved in it and tried to play this off as a hoax from the beginning. It's unclear to me why he let his base dig into this so much. I think that they are going to try to do everything they possibly can to turn the page. They've tried investigating Obama. Now they're doing a Russia meeting with Putin. Like, they are doing everything they can to try to turn the page. But the problem is the base, including people in Congress, in the Oversight Committee, are asking people to and subpoenaing people to come testify. So this is just going to drag out longer. Those people are coming up to testify in October. This is months more of this just trickling out drip by drip. The best thing to have been is not do the big press conference at the beginning with those binders when they all stood there, and not to release a letter saying there were no files.
So, Dave, ABC News reports that Maxwell said nothing during her meeting with Todd Blanche that would be harmful to President Trump, adding the conversations were recorded and the administration is considering releasing transcripts. So what does this suggest to you? I mean, you thought the grand jury transcripts would never be released. How about these?
Oh, no, I think this will be released, at least in part, because it helps the president. The reason why they had this private meeting between the number 2 person at the DOJ and a convicted sex trafficker was because they wanted information about Democrats who were involved, and they wanted information that would exonerate Donald Trump. And it looks like Ghislaine Maxwell is playing ball. How do I know? Well, she got sent to a minimum security prison, a club fed, right after the interview. And there's a possibility of a pardon down the road. So they want this information out there. But again, that information, just like the grand jury transcripts, are not going to satisfy the ravenous base who have been promised that there's an Epstein list and there's an Epstein file, and so far have received neither.
You know, to that transfer point, Megan, how unusual is it that more than a week after Maxwell was moved, the White House has not provided details of who approved it, how she was moved, why she was moved? How unusual is that?
I mean, listening to the experts that deal with the Department of Prisons and the Bureau of Prisons, I think that it's probably very unusual. I just don't think that these things are made public because you don't have someone this high profile. You also know that people who are accused and convicted of sex offenses do not get to move to a minimum security prison where it's very white collar crime. This is not something that most people would have the benefit of getting. So I don't necessarily know that we've ever been in a situation like this to have it be unusual. I think the whole thing from start to finish and moving her is unusual because this is not something where these types of criminals go.
Michelle, has the White House ever addressed the survivors?
No, they have not. And it's something that the president has made clear he doesn't like talking about. You know, every time this is brought up, he often lashes out at the reporter who asked the question, saying, why are you still talking about it? The only time it has even sort of come up was when the president was questioned about his comments that he ended his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein because he said that Jeffrey Epstein took some of his employees, in his words, he said, stole them. And one of those employees, according to the president, was Virginia Giuffre, who is one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. But the president over and over has said that he had no advance knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. So far, this is a thing that the White House has not wanted to speak about.
Well, Megan, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is pushing for a public hearing of the Oversight Committee to give survivors the opportunity to provide testimony if they wish to do so, saying, quote, if we are to hold powerful people to account, our investigation must center the voices they tried to silence. So the White House, can it force the White House to be more responsive to survivor perspectives now?
I don't think so. I think that you see a lot of survivors out in the media. I think you should see survivors if they would like to testify in front of Congress. If the Oversight Committee is hearing, is subpoenaing people, they should also be allowed to give their testimony. At the center of this is a sex trafficking ring, and there are hundreds of victims. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes in the political back and forth. And I think that's the one thing that we cannot lose sight about. So I would ask reporters to keep asking the president about these survivors, because at the core of this is that it is them, and they are the ones that matter the most.
Last question quickly to you, Dave, because House Oversight Chair James Comer this week subpoenaed DOJ for the Epstein files, also subpoenaed documents from a list of high-profile figures, including Bill and Hillary Clinton, former attorneys general, but notably not Alex Acosta, Trump's former Secretary of Labor, who resigned in July 2019 when he felt Epstein had become a distraction for the first Trump presidency. What light can Acosta shed on this case?
everything. I mean, the whole non-prosecution agreement was signed by Alex Acosta. The fact that Epstein didn't serve any time in federal prison, the feds came in and they reached a deal with Epstein to have him serve some time in local facilities, state facilities, pleading guilty to state charges. I've never heard of that, where the feds come in and they do a plea deal to plead guilty to state, not federal charges. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. It just shows that James Comer's list is not a serious one. That's why he didn't include Acosta. That's why he didn't include Trump. That's why he didn't include victims. But instead he has Hillary Clinton and James Comey and Robert Mueller. It's as if he took a list of Trump's enemies and threw darts at it to decide who to subpoena. The whole thing is just reeks of politics.
We've just learned that the White House is considering inviting Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky to that high-stakes meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin next Friday in Alaska. That's according to a senior U.S. official and 3 people briefed on the internal discussions. It will be Trump and Putin's first meeting since Trump retook office and Putin's first visit to U.S. soil since 2015. And the stakes could not be higher for everyone involved. The New York Times reports, quote, Russia has shown no signs of pulling back in its war against Ukraine. Instead, it has intensified its long-range strikes on Ukrainian cities and attacks across the front line. Remember, Trump promised to end Russia's war in Ukraine on his very first day in office. Here's what he had to say yesterday.
It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
Well, this morning, Zelensky flatly rejected that idea, saying in part, quote, Ukraine will not give Russia any awards for what it has done. Critics were also concerned that Ukraine was not involved enough in discussions. Listen.
What I really worry about, and I know many people in Ukraine do too, is that the president will get in a meeting with Putin, one-on-one, no advisors there. And Putin, and I've been in meetings with Putin, he is persuasive. Yeah. He knows his history. He will say, this is just a fair deal, Mr. President. And he'll come out and do a press meeting and say, well, we agreed to this. And he's agreeing to things that are not his to give up.
He has never put pressure on Russia. Russia continues, as we speak, to bombard and kill Ukrainians and take its property. No sanctions and no weapons given to Ukraine to defend themselves. And then to say that you're going to negotiate a deal with Vladimir Putin without taking into consideration of where President Zelensky is no deal at all.
And joining us now is journalist and geopolitics analyst Bobby Ghosh. Bobby, thank you for being here at the table with us this evening. So I remember just a matter of days or weeks ago hearing talk that sanctions could be on the table here. You know, Trump is now angry with Putin. Now we understand he's coming to U.S. soil for the first time in about a decade. What do you make of that fact, this meeting, this summit, and the news now that Zelensky may join them?
Well, to use the kinds of terms that Trump himself uses, what happened here is that he folded. He made an ultimatum. He gave Putin a deadline that was yesterday. It ran out yesterday. Demanded that Putin change his behavior. Putin ignored him. If anything, he ramped up his attacks on Ukraine. And Trump essentially folded and is now rewarding Putin by giving him an opportunity, a photo op with the president of the United States on American soil. The Zelensky thing, the news just broke, as you guys announced it, that the White House is now considering whether to invite him. I mean, how is this a consideration? This should have been invitation number 1. And it's not yet clear, A, that the invitation has gone out, B, that Zelensky is coming, and C, and this is crucial, that Putin will agree to being in the same room as Zelensky. In the past, Putin has rejected that idea. Putin said, I'm not meeting with Zelensky. So these are all balloons that the White House is sending up to try and see. Now, they're responding to not just pushback from Zelensky, but also from very strong pushback from the Europeans, the people who are going to have to live with the consequences of any deal that Trump tries to put out there. President Macron of France said yesterday that you cannot have these discussions without Ukraine being involved, Ukraine being in the room. So Trump is responding to a situation, I suppose, by the very low bar that have been set by Trump's foreign policy in general. I suppose the positive thing is that he is responding to pushback from the Europeans. But that's, as I say, a really, really low bar. I'm not optimistic that anything is going to come out of this. First of all, I'm not 100% certain this meeting is going to take place. And if it does take place, I don't think any needles will be moved.
So Zelensky has already said that he rejects any kind of negotiated settlement that cedes land to Russia that has been taken through Russia's territorial aggression. So it seems like the discussion is already at a non-starter even before it starts. One thing that I do find interesting, though, is how Ukrainian public opinion has shifted. And we have some polling that we can show on screen. But from at the beginning, as wars usually start, the Ukrainians wanted to fight till the end and were rejecting any kind of negotiated settlement. Now you see where there is more of a willingness to negotiate. But still, the polling shows that Ukrainians don't want to cede any territory either. They're with Zelensky there. So what kind of reasonable middle ground is even possible when both negotiating parties are so far apart?
So first and foremost, not only is Zelensky not willing to make a deal, he cannot. The Ukrainian constitution, this is a democratically elected leader of a democratic country. The Ukrainian constitution specifically prohibits giving away territory without the approval of the Ukrainian people. So he would have to take it back to a vote if it came to that. And to your point, it's one thing for Ukrainians to say we want a negotiated settlement, quite another to say we're willing to give up territory. I don't think there's appetite for that at all. You cannot have, throughout history we've seen this, you cannot have any negotiations while the guns are still being fired, while the missiles are still being fired into Ukraine from Russia. So the starting point, and the Europeans have said this all along, the starting point has to be there has to be a cessation of fire from both sides, primarily from the Russian side. The Ukrainians have agreed to that. The Russians simply don't want to.
Well, they're doing the exact opposite of that.
They've ramped it up. So before there can be negotiations, the guns have to stop. The missiles have to stop raining down on Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian cities. And then there can be a discussion about negotiations. Who's going to be there, where it's going to take place, who the negotiators are going to be, who the middlemen are going to be. This is going to be a long and we've seen this over and over again. You know, the most recent example in Europe I can think of was during the collapse of the former Yugoslavia and the long negotiations during the Bill Clinton administration that finally led to a settlement there. It takes years for this to take place, but it has to start with a ceasefire. If there's no ceasefire, it's pointless to even talk about this.
I have a question about trust here. So the Trump White House is, there's not a ton of trust there. Putin has said he was going to do ceasefires and then not held them. So who, the Europeans are sort of in there making their need, sort of advocating for Zelensky, but how much does the lack of trust in these two groups really undermine the process?
You put your finger on it. Who's going to be the honest broker that brings all these parties to the table? The United States has to have a big role. The United States has bankrolled to a substantial extent Ukraine's resistance to the invasion, both in terms of arms and diplomatic cover, as well as economic support. So the United States has to be in the room. But can the United States, under this administration, can it play that role of an honest broker? And the short answer is no, it can't. The Europeans don't trust America to play that role. The Ukrainians don't. And frankly, neither really do the Russians. So it has to be somebody else. Who that somebody else is, we don't know yet. Can it be a multilateral organization, the United Nations, something like that? It could be. In the past, there's been some suggestions that these discussions could take place in a neutral place, so in Dubai, in the UAE, and maybe the Emiratis play a role there, or the Qataris play a role there. We'll get to that again, but it has to start with a ceasefire. It has to start with all the sides agreeing that while the negotiations are taking place, they'll stop being at war.
At this point, is Trump not embarrassed by the way that this has been perceived by the world? The way that his work, Steve Witkoff, the impression, it seems, from most is that, Putin has tricked you again and again and again. He's going to do it again in Alaska if he arrives, as you said. That's a big if.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
does he understand from your assessment what this appears to look like to everyone else?
He seems capable of blowing past every embarrassment and sort of reframing it in his own mind and the way he communicates it as a victory. So this happened, we remember the first time when he went to Singapore to meet Kim Jong-un. And he said, we fell in love and I'll get a deal and I'll tell them to stop the nukes and they will. And they completely ignored him. But in his mind, that was a big success. So he's very interested in the pageantry of being president. So having a big summit in Alaska with a man that he admires or he respects because he sees Putin as this powerful figure, somebody that he has for a very long time admired. This is not just some short-term thing. Being in his presence and having that summit gives the appearance of action, even though it's not actual action. And that may be enough for Trump. In the past, he has been satisfied with that. And to be honest, to give him props, he's been able to reframe that and communicate that to his support base, and they seem willing to buy it. They seem willing, the people that he cares about most, the people who vote for him, who form the base of MAGA, they seem to buy into all this pageantry and the way he presents it to them. So if he thinks he can get away with it one more time, then he will try. But you have to assume that with each failure, there is building up this sort of backlog. And at some point, the dam will break and that support base will turn around and say, well, we've seen this movie before. We see this thing happening over and over again.
Well,
at some point, they have to say that.
It is going to certainly be an interesting week as we watch if this happens and how it unfolds. So, Bobby Ghosh, thank you so much for being with us.
The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, has just got a good line of bull. I ended all of the lawless so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion bull. They don't know what the they're doing. We get a lot of bull thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. I got indicted 5 times, impeached 2 times, all bullshit. That's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit.
Ooh. That's just a few examples of President Trump breaking presidential norms as this week, believe it or not, marked the 200th day of his second term. And in just the past week alone, Trump has sought to top himself in the breaking norms category. There was his abrupt firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner on Friday, August the 1st, just hours after a weak jobs report. Then on Tuesday, Trump scaled the White House to stand on the roof to survey his planned decimation of the East Wing, home of the First Lady's offices, which he plans to replace with a massive, architecturally dysmorphic ballroom, because it will be. Balls are just so 2025 these days. Anyway, so then also this week, public tours for the White House are going to be placed on hold as construction is set to begin within weeks for the aforementioned new $200 million ballroom. And joining us to discuss is comedian Devram Stiefler of The Good Liars. Did I mispronounce your name just then?
That's right. You did it just perfectly.
I did. Okay. It was just like the pressure. I wanted to do it right because I can be a moron about pronunciations. But so this, I guess, Donald Trump, this ballroom that he thinks is necessary, which it's going to be massive and it's going to dwarf the proportions of the current White House. Like it's just an architectural mess.
Right.
Why? Why is this necessary?
Well, I've been thinking a little bit about it, and I think it might be a convenience thing. He is, used to being at Mar-a-Lago. He's comfortable there. That's where he feels like he's in charge. And as it stands now, he would have to fly all the way to Florida to stash documents or spill state secrets. And so I think this is his way of kind of bringing that feel to the White House. And that's just a more comfortable place for him to do those sorts of things that he's used to.
Davram, I have a real important question for you, a serious question. Why are there little tables now in the Rose Garden, and what with little umbrellas, and is there going to be food service?
Oh, man, I will have to ask whomever is in charge what the plans for service are. But I think it's a little bit in keeping with what you're talking about. Donald Trump just changing norms and having people kind of applaud that. So the Rose Garden has been there for quite a while and actually is kind of beloved.
And it can be really beautiful, and they do garden tours. And
Right.
It's a really nice
Some of the images
thing.
that have come out, not a whole lot of garden left.
No.
When you saw the president walk out on the roof this week, what were you hoping he would say to the American people?
Well, I honestly wasn't confident that he would say much. To me, it looked like a moment just that like a very old man would have.
Oh, he was lost?
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, I grew up in, a neighborhood, and I would see like an old guy on a roof, and his wife would be like, "Get down, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm surveying my plans for my garden project."
That's right.
Be careful up there. So I think he might be losing it a little bit, and he just kind of wandered up there. He didn't have a specific reason that he was up there. So that was where my head
Do you a little bit of lore? Do you know who probably was the coolest person to ever go on the White House roof? Willie Nelson, when he smoked a joint there during the Carter presidency.
Okay, wow, all right. So, Willie Nelson might have been lost a little bit as well. So that actually, I think, proves my point. Donald Trump might have just wandered up there.
Fun fact, Elise Jordan is a Willie Nelson fan.
Big Willie Nelson super fan. Also a big Rose Garden fan. I do like the Rose Garden. I don't like that it's like just a concrete slab now.
Yeah, it looks like a...
It's depressing.
Right.
Right.
It looks like kind of like the place you'd go to smoke a cigarette at like a Fairfield Inn or a La Quinta, I think you said. So if that's like what you want in your White House and in your former Rose Garden, then I think it's perfect.
Man,
Stuck on the yellow umbrellas we just had on the screen there. I have to ask you too, days ago, Donald Trump Jr. shared this interesting meme that depicts his father throwing a sex toy from that roof that he had walked on onto members of the WNBA. This, of course, comes after WNBA players have actually had stuff thrown on them on the courts.
Right.
Are we even surprised by this stuff anymore?
We are not.
We are not.
We are not.
Definitively not.
We are definitively not surprised by this. If you had been to the number of Trump rallies that I have as part of the Good Liars, the T-shirts that you would see at these rallies would let you know not to be surprised by this. Terrible, racist, misogynist, whatever you can imagine. We're talking here about presidential norms, but also about people and the norms that they want to break, and that Donald Trump gives them permission to break, so that they can say and do whatever they want in their
But I thought the people at those rallies told us that they cared about protecting women's sports. So why this?
That's a good question. I bet that tweet got a lot of likes and retweets, and I bet that those people might not have been being totally honest with you.
Is it fair to say these people are not feminists?
Again, if you saw these T-shirts, there was one woman I stopped, and I just can't say what was on the T-shirt, but I was like, do you regret?
Can you give us like a hint?
Yeah, we need something here.
Say no to Joe and the bleep there. And she was like so excited that she'd gotten this T-shirt. And I said, where are you going to wear it? Where are you going to wear this T-shirt? And then she kind of got like a little sheepish, and she was like, I don't know. Maybe to bed or something. and then she just kind of like slowly set it down back in her car, and I think had a moment to think about it. But those shirts fly
It had an impact on her.
off the shelves. It's possible. It's possible.
I've interviewed you guys before, and one of the things that I've always been shocked by is you say that there never is a moment where these people are like, oh, you're right.
Well, I think usually there is a moment where they think, am I correct? Should I be rethinking things? And then you actually literally watch them turn back toward their group of friends, and maybe a friend throws an arm around their shoulder, and it's like, wow, you did really great over there. And then they just go back to talking about whatever they did in their garage or at the corner bar, and they tell each other that they're right, and they go back to it.
Right.
But sometimes I think we are trying to convince the people watching maybe of certain things, not necessarily the people we're talking to, because that has seemed like a tall order. Of the hundreds of people we've spoken to, I would say.
Let's look at some favorability ratings. Let's do something. Donald Trump doesn't care about being liked at all, but his favorability in recent polling, the newsmaker favorable USA Today ratings, he's stuck around 41, and you got RFK ahead of him. You got even Biden ahead of him. Bernie, up there,
the Pope,
close to Zelensky, and then you got the Pope. Do you think that Trump is worried that RFK is his successor, his heir apparent? You think it bothers him a little bit? He let him into the fold.
I would have liked
now,
to see JD Vance on there. Where would JD have
He's
been?
probably like way down
question.
in the 30s. So I don't think he even. I think we might have another poll about favorability of within the Trump administration. I think JD's at around like 38%. So yeah.
I do think it would bother him.
Pete, maybe hating women isn't such a good thing for your
I think yes. I think if we know about Donald Trump and his thin skin and just the enormous amount of feelings that he seems to have about anybody that says anything bad about him, when you see him being beat by people in his own administration, I think that has to hurt. And a lot of times he kind of does something about it. Like he'll throw people under the bus in some way or another. He has to be the favorite. So I do think it hurts his feelings. And that would be about the millionth thing we've seen hurt his feelings. So